Welcome to the Business of Apparel podcast. This is the place to learn how to start and scale your own apparel brand and fill it with loyal customers for years to come. I'm your host, Rachel Erickson, owner and CEO of Unmarked Street. I can't wait to share this episode with you. Welcome back to the Business of Apparel podcast. Today, I have one of my really best friends with me, Jessica Ledin. She and I worked together 10 years ago. Is that right? Yeah, that's kind of crazy. But yeah, we started working together 10 years ago in our career. We both have very similar paths that we've been taking over the last 20 years of working in the apparel industry. And today, we're going to get a little bit real about the apparel industry, specifically about the outdoor apparel industry, I think, and just kind of how it runs itself, some of the real stories of how things go. And Jessica, I'm super excited to have you here. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here with you.
Yeah. So one thing that I think you and I have super in common, and this is something that I think just both of our personalities have always lent to, but as we've been taking on different development roles throughout the apparel industry, like you come in as a developer, or you come in as a designer, or you come in as a production person or a sourcing person or a product manager or whatever. For some reason, when you come in as a developer and you're really talented at your job and you kind of understand all of the pieces and parts, I think you and I have really always been kind of thrown into like, learn the process, learn the calendar, learn the timeline, learn production, learn design, and do all of it. So I kind of just want to chat through that a little bit with you and some of the experiences you've had, because I think that's a really real image of what happens to development teams in the apparel industry.
Yeah. And I think it happens to developers for the reason you say. We're so reliant on what happens before product development. And we're also really involved in what happens after product development, because a lot of times you have a fantastic production team, but they may not know the intricacies of, why did that fabric get cut that way? Or, this QA issue, like how do we fix this? We need an answer right now and we need a solution and we're in production. So I think for that reason, we end up getting pulled across so many different areas.
Yeah.
And learning the calendar to make sure we manage everybody else's schedule too, to make sure that we get all of our information at the same time that we need it. And we're so integral in the costing too, which is such a huge piece of it, because if you have a design that you're looking at the very, very beginning, and you know that they have $3 buttons and $20 fabric, and it's not going to meet your margin goals, you're kind of at the very beginning negotiating that. And you're also at the very end understanding where's inventory and why is my label stuck in China.
Yep.
So yeah, you just kind of end up across everything.
Yeah. It's really interesting. At one point I was told by like a product management mentor of mine, like product management is meant to kind of be like this octopus kind of at the center of everything going on around them, right? Like they have to be able to reach out and like understand all of the different elements of everything happening. And I really disagree with that. I really think it's the development role that ends up having that hat. And I think the best developers out there are being forced to figure out design and being forced to figure out, fit and technical pattern making. There's a lot to it. And so I know in some of your most recent roles, you've kind of just been running the whole departments.
Yeah. So everything from at the very front, giving, design direction, how do we cost the garment? How do we update the design to make it production friendly, to make it cost friendly? And what does that really mean for all of the materials involved, all the way through production and to making sure we get it on the boat on time.
Yeah.
So it's really everything in between. What's awesome about it, I guess, is that I learn, hey, this satin label that I developed in China that now has issues getting out of China, I'm not going to now put that in my development for the next season up here. I'm going to say, you know what, we need a locally sourced tie-back label from Vietnam, and we're not going to bring that in. So there's pieces that are so valuable for companies when you have that experience, because you're dealing with this production issue here that you're implementing in design here.
That's true. That's so true.
But you don't really know whether you're going to be writing fit comments, talking to the pattern maker oversees on why their pattern adjustment was incorrect, dealing with a production issue, or working with design and saying, hey, that label you selected isn't sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
So your role is so vast. And I would say definitely at small to medium sized companies, it really goes across all fields, even though they hire you as the product developer.
Right.
It's so rare, unless you're at a really big corporation, that you're just doing product development. And even that, product development and technical design now, I know, go hand in hand. Like,
They're
my
almost
degree,
interchangeable.
yeah, I would agree, which can be a problem. Like my degree, and I know your degree is in technical design. So we have the pattern skills
Yep.
and those really technical skills to make sure that the garment can fit. There's people that just have the product development side and don't have that pattern side and the fit side that are getting put into fit roles.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're finding garments and we're getting to the very end of the process that don't fit.
Yep.
And so you're getting yourself in trouble by having those two be interchangeable in some places.
Yeah.
Where I think you can be a technical designer and a product developer. I don't know that you can go the other way successfully without having somebody really show you how to do technical design successfully and understand the pattern piece of it. Those two are so connected.
Totally agreed. And I've been at different places where they've done it opposite ways, where they hire developers and kind of force you into this technical designer role, or they hire a technical designer and then also kind of force you to learn development, which in and of itself is a different set of skills. Like I think, and just for you as you're listening, technically a developer is meant to do kind of factory communication. They're meant to do like the bill of materials in your tech pack. They're meant to do like a lot more of, and this is maybe a terrible way of describing it. You might have a better way, but like I feel like it's more of like the admin, like the important, like this is how we're going to keep things going. Whereas on the technical design side, it's very much about the patterns. It's about the fit. It's about the way that like the garment is constructed. And so those are two very different skill sets. And you can come in as kind of a junior developer with not a ton of apparel experience because you're kind of doing a lot more of like communication skills and you're doing a lot more like writing of details and tracking things. Whereas as someone who's a technical designer really does need like a fashion degree.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it.
So I would say like, as people coming into the industry who want to label themselves as developers, I think just kind of this knowledge of knowing that there might be a lot asked of you in different roles and being open and willing, I think, to really expand your education into other areas is going to be key for you. And if you're not of that kind of personality, I think to Jessica's point, being really diligent about working with larger companies is a smart move for you because Jess, I know you've worked at different places that are pretty big too. And at those places, you're kind of just like a cog in the wheel.
Yeah. Honestly, those places kind of bore me.
Yes.
So
yes. Once you've done it the other way, it's hard to just be a cog in the wheel.
It's really hard because I started my career out at a smaller company and then I went to the big company and it was really a shock to me to only be writing comments and measuring all day.
Yeah.
I was like, I am used to doing a lot more. So I think it really depends on where you want to take your career. But I also think when you're hiring somebody, if you're coming in and hiring a product developer and you are a smaller company, having somebody that comes from a small company and can say how design links with product development, links with technical design, links with production, links with sourcing, all of those pieces, if they understand that, that's a great person to bring into your company to help you with this process. If they're from a big company, and they only know how to write comments in technical design, that may not be the right fit for a smaller to medium-sized company.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really great advice. And I don't think that enough people are really talking about that. They use the terms interchangeably, and I don't think that that's valid to use those terms interchangeably. And I think something else as a developer that we get asked to do quite a bit is travel. And this is something that I've talked a lot about when it comes to, my own apparel line and like I've had to travel so much. I have like this travel uniform and like this travel kit that I just basically go to whenever I need to do it. Cause in the apparel industry, it's happened to me enough times where someone comes up to me and says, you need to be on a plane in 48 hours, book it now, get all your shit together and go. And without like having a process for that, it was really hard for me to do that all the time But I also wanted to kind of get a little bit in today to like I know you and I both have some interesting travel stories. There's some funny ones and there's some scary ones and there's some happy ones. But yeah, I'll kind of lead us out with one of my worst travel experiences. I was in China. We were doing a production. God, this like story is just so emotional for me. We were challenged at this company. We were delivering late for production, and so a small handful of us had been challenged to go overseas, fix the product, get it delivered on time. And if we could do that, basically, we were being told that we would save our department's jobs. So we were kind of in the hot seat. We went over and we did it. Not only did we deliver the bulk production product on time, but we were having like this huge meeting and we didn't have any samples for it. I literally carried all of those samples home in my suitcase. We were like going through customs at the Hong Kong airport trying to get home, and the customs officer came up to me, and the two people who were with me were like freaking out because you legally you cannot carry samples home that are not like cut or damaged in some way. But we couldn't do that because we had to present them at this meeting. And so I'm like sitting there like talking this customs officer up about working at this company. We make this really cool product and all this stuff, like trying to like hide this giant suitcase that's like behind me stuffed full of samples. And then while we were still in China, we actually found out that they weren't even going to wait for us to get back. They like fired the whole team.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah, it was one of the worst experiences I've ever had in my whole career. One of the people that they fired while we were gone was actually a direct report of mine, and I knew nothing about it. They just,
That's terrible.
yeah. So just kind of kicking us off with some of our fun travel stories, but yeah, just kind of a little bit of a glimpse.
Yeah. I don't think you're a product developer until you go through customs with samples.
So true.
So, because I have, of course, gone through customs with samples and got pulled aside, of course, with my gigantic suitcase on a a trip was last minute.
Yep.
Of course, I think I had less than 24 hours, and I was in charge of going and getting the samples for a sales meeting.
Yeah. Yeah.
I had
You
to
can't
fly.
cut those.
No, don't cut those. So I had to fly to China. I picked up the samples and I got caught because I wasn't there very long. And then it was
Like, why are you here for a day?
2 days. So I went through customs, of course, got pulled aside with a gigantic suitcase.
Oh my God.
The only time I've been so thankful, I am originally born in Frankfurt, Germany, because I was part of a military family. And this guy must have had a soft spot for military families and asked me if I had samples. And I said yes. And he said, "You're not supposed to bring them." And I said, "I understand." And he said, "Thank your dad for his service," and let me go through.
Amazing.
I don't know what light was shining down on me that day to get through the situation. So that is my caught through customs story, and I'm so glad I wasn't in customs jail.
I know, right? I think everyone just like worries about that, and then like the potential of missing your flight and not getting home on time, and like I have all these samples with me. What are they gonna like? What do they do with them? Do you know? Do they confiscate them and then?
I have no idea.
Yeah,
but
I'm sure someone out there has a story that they can tell us about where they know what they do with the samples if they take them away.
They weren't lucky like us and got through.
No.
That because it is a fear in every company I've been at when you're going to get the samples is,
yeah,
what happens, and everybody has somebody that they know, somebody in a distant chain that did get caught and got in trouble.
Yeah.
So,
definitely.
But I haven't thought about that for a long time. So.
I think one other thing that like, as much as I'm a big talker when it comes to like traveling and stuff like that, I will say I always like to travel with other people. And there have always been, there was a key time in my career where I was starting to hear a lot of different stories from some of the other women that I was working with about issues that they had when they traveled alone. And I was always pretty adamant. And to be honest with you, like my husband was always pretty adamant about saying like, I've heard enough of those stories and someone's going to go with you just to at least, keep you company. that has been something really interesting for my career because it actually cost me a promotion at one point where I was at a brand and they asked me to go on a trip by myself. And my husband was like, I've heard enough stories about this country that you're about to go to. Like, I think like you need to have someone with you. And so I told them, I'm not comfortable. My husband's not comfortable. And I was up for promotion at that time. And they ended up totally just rewriting the job description for the next level of work to say they added a line that said willing to travel by oneself. And I was like, cool. So I'm trying to be safe, trying to make sure that I'm not scaring the shit out of my husband by going by myself on this trip that he doesn't really want me to go on by myself. And yeah, it cost me a promotion. But I know you've been a lot braver than me. You've done a lot of traveling by yourself.
No, that's because I didn't have a husband behind me at the time. No, don't do that. So it actually was just ignorance. I can look back now in my age and say that was really stupid. But I learned really early on because, so in my first job traveling, God, which was 15 years ago, 15, 16 years ago, a long time ago. So I was in my early 20s and they sent me alone by myself, which now I look back and I'm like, who sends a 20-year-old over to China? And I was in the cab to go to the airport. And all of a sudden, the cab driver just gets off and goes on all of these crazy curvy roads. And I was like, I had put my passport and everything in the trunk. I never made that mistake again because I was like, once this cab stops, I need to get out and run. And luckily, the cab driver was just trying to make extra fare. And we eventually made it to the airport. But it was a really good learning lesson. And I really, after that, like I would carry my purse and my passport with me, whatever I'm going to have, because I've had more than one time where I've thought, when this car stops, I need to get out and run.
Oh my God.
Because it's tough. It's tough traveling in foreign countries by yourself. And you do get put in really bad situations that aren't great. So I just think actually you always traveling with a partner is just wise.
I remember one story. I think the one story that kind of, it was similar kind of to that, but for some reason it always involves like sketchy cabs. But there was a girl that I was working with who got into a cab and it looked totally legit. She was traveling to Vietnam. It's hard to know. Like if you go to New York City, for example, like there's the yellow cabs that you can get into. And then there's other different color cabs. And some of them, what they call, this is probably not a very PC term, so forgive me out there, but like they call them gypsy cabs. And they kind of do the same thing where they'll drive around to make extra fare. And sometimes they won't take you to the places you really want to go. And so like when you live in New York, you kind of learn that thing. But if you're going to like a totally different country or something like that, it's really hard to know, is this a legit cab or is it something different? And she got into a cab that was not legit and they did not take her to where she needed to go. And she was kind of stranded in the middle of Vietnam without, and then she was terrified, of course, to like hail another cab. And when people don't know the language and you're by yourself, and it was just all this stuff. And I just was like, you know what? I think I'm sure I could get myself out of a situation, but I just don't want to be put in one. So
yeah, no. And I have a good story of us putting ourselves. I went to Romania with one of my coworkers and friends, and we decided to rent a car and go to the castle because that sounded like a fun day. It was really a 2-day trip at the end of our time there. And we were out probably 4 or 5 hours away from the city we needed to be in, the Timisoara, and our car broke down. So we were in an area that didn't have cell phone service, certainly no Google Translate, broken down car on the side of the road. And we just stood out of our car, waving cars down. And we had to wave down multiple cars until we finally got one that spoke English
yeah.
and on us. And drove us to like this little restaurant in the middle of nowhere. And so we could try to get a hold of somebody at the factory to come and pick us up. And all I remember is being at this little restaurant, and I'm vegetarian. So the only thing that they would make me was noodles with butter, and it was the most disgusting noodles.
Oh,
And we waited there, oh my God, forever until finally somebody came and picked us up. We didn't get back until the wee hours in the morning, and we had like 3 or 4 hours before we hopped on our
oh
flight
my
home.
God.
So it was terrifying and I guess waving down cars, but also almost missing the flight home because that when you're traveling,
Yeah.
God, you just want your flight home with
Yes.
no issues.
Yes.
Yeah. So
That is so
that
true.
was
The
that was a self-induced
yeah, really.
long trip.
I'll tell one more kind of along those lines. So even though I wasn't traveling by myself, one year we went to Germany to Interbike and not Interbike, it's Eurobike. And at Eurobike that year, I was training for triathlons a ton and knew I needed to be able to get out and just do like a run every morning. And I went out for a run one morning and it was a far enough run that I got myself kind of turned around. And I thought I had turned on my international phone package to be able to have like maps and call people and all that stuff. And so I'm standing in the middle of this intersection in, I think, Freiburg, Germany, and I don't know where I am. I go into like every single like little bakery. It was in the morning, right? So like every little bakery that's open, nobody speaks English. I don't really speak German. Um, and I'm standing in this intersection going, well, I just don't know how to find my hotel. Nobody knows what I'm saying when I'm saying the hotel name. Like I'm just going to stand on this intersection for the rest of my life. And I don't know what like triggered me, but like all of a sudden I recognized where I was and figured out how to get back to the hotel.
That's amazing. I think that that's happened. The one thing I will say, I have been training for marathons while traveling in China. Wear a mask. I got so much, so sick from the smog, which
Oh,
I was
you
so
got
silly not
bronchitis,
to.
didn't you?
I had terrible, and now I get it like every year.
Oh,
So it's like the gift that keeps on giving from China. But there's so many times when I've gone out running in places I shouldn't have. And that was, when I was like, I'm young, I can do whatever I want. I was in the Philippines, which I was a place I will never go back to again. And we had it was almost like a compound that we stayed at, like gated, you need to stay here. But me being me, and I was training for something, so I needed to go running more than whatever the little area that I was in. I hopped the fence like
oh my gosh.
person and went running. And just when I came back, the terrified look on everybody's face of how unsafe that was. I can't believe the amount of like we're just not used to dogs that are just out, around that it's just not something we deal with in the
Yeah,
US.
yeah,
And like the stray dogs that were following me and like the whole experience was crazy. And at the time I thought it was funny. And now as soon as I got back and heard how that was not the right decision to make, I learned
yeah.
that that's not what you do. You don't have a fence to go get your run in for your upcoming race.
Yeah. No, I know, obviously I know exactly what you mean though, because it's like as a member of the outdoor industry, like you kind of are a member of the outdoor industry and you participate in a lot of the sports, you do a lot of the things. And so, I mean, there would be some trips that I would go on and I'd be so adamant about needing to get in like a swim at some pool that I would find like some really like scary looking YMCA that I could go to in the morning and like go do a lap swim. Like, who the hell knows what was in those pools? Like, I don't know why that was my priority other than anything else, but
I think when you're in it and you're like, I know for both of us, there was, 10 plus years of my life, I was going to China every
few
2 to 4 times a
yeah,
year.
yeah,
Yeah, every couple months. So it's like, it already disrupts your life so much with the time travel and like the
yeah,
time zone change and your work is really challenging because you're so busy before the trip, you're so busy after the trip. And I think that there's part of it where you just want to keep like, okay, this race I have coming up is my normal. Like that's what I want to do.
yeah,
And so I think that there's a mindset, that we've both had where it's like, I'm going to go, but I want to do this because this is my thing that I'm doing outside of,
yeah.
what end up being 12 to 14-hour days when you're traveling. Your 10 to 12-hour days before you travel, and really your 10 to 12-hour days after, and then you're so jet lagged.
Yes. Yep.
You're still having to continue on like you didn't just fly to the other side of the country. And I think that it's a huge challenge when you're traveling, and then, that's kind of your one thing, right? I have a race that I'm going for.
Yeah.
So
It's such a good point. It's like a way to have normalcy among all of it. I remember one year, this was the year I realized my limits in traveling. I did 14 trips in a year.
oh my God.
And I think the shortest trip was 4 days. So it was at least a trip, if not two a month. I was gone the whole time. I think it was July. So I was about halfway through the year, and I knew I had a whole bunch of other trips already booked and coming up. And I was like at lunch with my husband for like one of the few days that we'd seen each other in between all these trips, and just like was eating the sandwich, like crying. I'm just so tired. Like jet lag is so real, especially at that level when you're like in and out of the country constantly. It's hard on your body.
It's really, really hard. And that's where I think and product developers tend to be the ones that go too. And it's for that. I don't know. There's something in us as product developers where we kind of take control and we want to know it all and be part of it and help and expedite and make things efficient. And we just end up being the team that ends up going.
Yeah. Well, it goes right back to what we were saying about being able to do a little bit of all of it, because at the end of the day, if they have questions about design, I might not have my designer there with me, but I can help make a decision because I'm educated on it. And I might not have my production person there with me, but I know all the implications of what decision I'm about to make about production. So I think that's why, at least I see that developers are usually sent on a lot of these trips, and they're crucial 100%. To have there.
Yeah, I totally think so. I think when you get into product development or technical design is what I got my degree in, you think, oh, it's going to be so fun and I'm going to go every once in a while. And I think a trip every once in a while would be fantastic.
Yeah.
But an international trip every couple times every couple months is really, really tough on your personal life. It's really tough on your work life.
Yeah.
It's really tough on all those different pieces.
Yeah.
And you just feel like shit.
Yeah.
when you get home.
Yeah. And I think this is maybe terrible to say out loud to whoever's listening, but there was a moment there too where I thought that the travel was actually holding a lot of my relationships together, because I was gone so often. It was like that age-old saying of like, absence makes the heart grow fonder. And so for a really long time, I thought, my career is sending me, all over the world 3, 4, 5 times a year on a regular basis. Like it must be that makes, my marriage work. And when we sheltered in place for COVID, I was terrified, to be honest, for my marriage. Like I had no idea like what was going to happen, because I'd been gone for so much of every year all the time. And we had never like literally spent every minute of that whole year together. And like, I'm really happy to say that like our marriage is stronger than it's ever been. And that wasn't true, but there was kind of a moment where like you realize like how impactful that travel is on everything.
Yeah. I think I added up through my passport a long time ago at this point, all of like it was stamped and when I stamped out. And I had been in China for like over the last 6 years, more than a year and a half of my life.
Oh my God. Yeah.
And I was like, my God, I need to know more Mandarin. Much time there.
I know all I ever learned was Shay, which is terrible.
So, but like really that is to like look back and see that huge of a chunk of your life is spent not here. It's really crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for listening to the Business of Apparel podcast. I would so appreciate hearing your thoughts on the show. And if you know someone who could benefit from it, please share it with them. My biggest desire is to help other apparel professionals understand the nuances of our industry so we can all work toward making better product for a better world. If you would like to connect further, I'd love to invite you to send me a message through my website, unmarkstreet.com, where I do weekly trainings through my video channel, a a monthly newsletter, and offer so many resources to help you start and scale a profitable apparel brand.